Hello, this is part 2 of my GetX state management tutorial. In part 1, I discussed how to use observables to update the state in your app based on Rx variables. And those are great, but they take up RAM in your app. Sometimes you want more control over your state. So in this video, I'm going to show you how to use non-observable variables in GetX. And I'm also going to go over workers. So from part 1, we have this code here. I've added the menu info state. So I've added a new controller here. It's a map or a menu controller, and I'm setting the variables individually. So I'm setting the name, color, and location. The menu object is from part 1, but before the video, I created this controller here, and I added it to the main also. So you have restaurant controller and menu controller. So if we go to that screen now, I have this, so I can update the variables individually or all at once. So I can say name, Tony's, Blue, Texas. If I press return on this third value here, you can see that only the third variable is updated here. So let's go to the menu, update menu, and you can see that we have the value.name.color.location for the menu object here. So this menu is the Rx variable. It's an Rx of type menu. And then we're setting the menu name, color, and location individually in the onSubmit of each text box. So if you press return on the color, it will only update the color in our state, and thus only this value here will get updated. So if I press return here, you'll see blue. But if I press submit here, let's go to the submit button, you'll see that I'm setting the entire menu here. So I'm setting the color, name, and location from the text input controllers here. So let's change this to Omaha, some location, and white. So if I press submit now, you can see that all three were updated at the same time. And that's because we're setting the entire menu object. So that's two different ways to set the menu Rx variable here. You can set the entire object like this, or you can set each individual variable inside. So you have name, color, and location. I'm now going to discuss using GetBuilder. So GetBuilder allows you to have more control over when your state is updated. So let's go to the restaurant controller. And you see now our set name is an Rx variable. But let's change this to a non-observable. And let's get rid of the final, and that's a string. So now we cannot set our string the same way here. Now we have to do it the normal way. You have a normal equation here. You would say name equals resto name. Okay, let's rebuild. And you can see we have an error because we're still using .value in different places. So let's go back to our code. And now, since this is no longer a observable, we cannot use OBX. So let's get rid of the OBX here. And now instead of the OBX widget, I want to use the GetBuilder widget. So let's go to the docs real quick. So I'm going to search for that. So GetBuilder. So GetBuilder is a simpler way of managing your state. Let's go down here, and you'll see that you need to build your controller like this, or build your GetBuilder widget like this. And you pass in the controller that you want to use, and then you can actually define the builder widget that gets returned here. Okay? Keep in mind, you only need this init if you're building the controller for the first time. That means that you're not putting it in the main here, like this. I'm going to keep it like this just to be consistent. So let's go back to the screen from before. And let's change this to a GetBuilder. So I'm going to say GetBuilder. And then we pass in the type of controller. So I'm going to say restaurant controller. Okay, and then I'm going to pass in this text widget here. And we're getting this error because we need to pass in our controller value. You can call this whatever you want to, actually. So I'm going to just call it controller. And now we don't actually need the value here, so we can get rid of this. Okay, so this is the alternate way of actually defining your state. So we'll see how this is different than using observables. So let's go back to the app. Oh yeah, I need to change it here too. So let's copy this, put it into edit name, and replace that here. And change this font size back. Okay, so that should be all the errors. Let's reload. It's not. So let's see what we have wrong. Okay, so I actually forgot to save it. Very simple mistake. So save, rerun. Okay, so everything looks good now. Let's go to the set name screen. And let's see what happens when I try to set the name now. Let's say Mike's, press return, and nothing happens. Let's go and see why nothing happens. So we have our GetBuilder restaurant controller. Let's go back to our restaurant controller. So the reason nothing happened is because we're not telling the app that this has been changed. To do that is actually really simple. We actually go down here and we call update, and that's it. You just say update. So like I said before, this is similar to calling notify listeners in your provider package. Okay, so let's save and reload. So let's go back to our set name or change name screen. Let's go Mike's, press return. And now you can see it says Mike's here. And if we go back to the home screen, it says Mike's here too. That gives you a little bit more control over when things are updated. So this behavior is the same as before, but this gives you more control. So like, say you're calling an API when you call this function here, and you want to do a lot of things here. You want to wait for the return data here, and then you want to update the name. So you can say resto name, and then you would do like call API here, and then you would set name from API data here, and then you will update. So that's a very good tool to have in your back pocket. So knowing when to use either the observable or the GetBuilder widget is kind of something that you just need to learn. The observable method gives you a lot more real-time type of state updates. And the GetBuilder widget gives you more control over when things are updated. So before we go to the workers section, I want to go to the followers card. Actually, not the followers card, the add follower screen. So that'll be this screen here. And let's add a follower. Let's say Mike. In our restaurant controller, I added these methods in the last video in part 1. I added the remove follower function and the remove review function here, but we're not actually using those yet. So I'm going to actually put a X icon here to remove the follower and review. So let's go to the add follower screen again. And in the list tile, I want to put a leading button. So let's do leading. And for this, I want this to be an icon button or icon button. And for the icon, I want that to be an icon widget. So icon icons dot close. Okay, put this on a different line. And for the onPressed, this will be pretty easy. I want to call a function to close the or to remove the follower. So it'll be resto controller dot remove follower, and we just pass in the index because we have set the index as the parameter here. So remove follower by index here. Okay. And that's it. So let's reload. And now you can see the X's here. So let's add a few more in here. Let's do, I don't know, Matt, Joe. Let's do my name, Julian. Okay, and you can see on this screen we have all 4 of those. So let's remove Joe. And now you can see we have 3 here. So Mike, Matt, Julian. Okay, pretty easy. So let's copy this entire thing here. Let's go to the add reviews. And in here, I'm going to put that below the column or the title here. And then I'm going to say remove review. For this, we're passing in the string name. So that's pretty easy. We just pass in the key here because that's what we have as the name. So we can just pass in the review entry dot key. Okay, so let's reload. Now let's go to the reviews. I'm just going to put in John, good, Joe, bad. We could check that here. John good, Joe bad. And then we can get rid of the John Good here. And now let's go back, and you can see it's gone here too. Okay, so I just want to show how you would actually remove data from your state list in map. Pretty easy. So now it's time to get into the main subject of this video, and that is workers. So let's go to the docs and look at the workers here. They allow you to trigger specific callbacks when an event occurs. Okay, so we're going to focus on the same 4 that are here in the docs. I don't really use ever all a lot. That's only if you have a list of observables. So not a observable list, but a list of observables. So yeah, we're going to focus on these 4 here. So let's go back to the code. And in the last video, in part 1, I added this Inet function here, but I'm not actually using it yet. But now we're actually going to use this. So only Inet gets called when you first initialize your controller. So be aware that as soon as you start this app from your main here, and you call these puts, this Inet function will run. Okay? So we're going to initialize our workers in here so we can control things that happen when we change the state of this controller. So let's go down here. And first I'm going to use the ever. So the first thing I want to do is listen for the follower list here. So let's go put in follower list. Follower list. And then we have our callback here. So I'm going to create the function. So this will be the list here. Let's do value arrow function. And then let's just print out, for now, we'll print out the actual value. Let's actually just print out what that is. So follower list value. Okay. So ever gets called whenever we update this list here. And now let's do another worker for once. So once, and we'll do follower list again. Same structure here. So value, we'll copy this here. So copy, paste, and follower list updated first time. Okay, so real quick, this ever means that when the follower list is updated, this print statement will be seen in the console here. So whenever this is updated. So once means the very first time this list is updated, this will get called. Every other time, this will not get called. Let's actually focus on these 2 for now. And I'm going to reload our app. And now let's go back to our add follower list here. And now I'm going to add a follower, Mike. So now you can see that we have follower list here, and then we have follower list updated for the first time with Mike. So let's add another item here. Let's add Anna. And now you can see that this line was called, but not this line. Whenever we update this list, this will always get called. This is pretty powerful stuff. Like if you want something to happen every time you update something in your app, like you want to make an API call or you want something to happen, you know, then this function is pretty powerful. So we have Mike, Anna, John. And if we remove a name here, you'll see that it's removed from the list here too. So this is a good way to test that your state is working correctly. And remember that once is only called once, the very first time. So keep in mind that this ever is always running, but we'll look at a way to actually make sure that we kind of dispose of that worker if we don't need it, to save up some memory. Okay, but once is called, after the first time it's called, then this gets released from memory, which is pretty nice. Okay, so let's go to the docs real quick. And there's 2 more workers that we want to look at. We want to look at debounce and interval. So say you have a user pressing a button to submit an API in your app, and they push it like 10 times in a row, but you only want to submit it 1 time. Debounce is a great way to make sure that in those 10 seconds, only one of those button clicks makes it submit the API call. So you have more control over when you post an API call. So debounce and interval are very similar. Debounce takes the very last input of a certain timed range So if you push a button 10 times, it'll take the 10th input and it'll do something with that based on the callback. So for interval, you can see here, it's like debounce, but it will ignore all user actions after a certain period of time. So if you send events for 1 minute, 1,000 per second, debounce will only see the last one. So debounce will see the last one, like I said, but the interval will deliver events every second. And if set to 3 seconds, it will deliver 20 events during that minute. So that's just a little math here. Let's go back to the app. And let's do debounce first. So let's say debounce. And for this one, I want to listen for the follower count. So similar to the previous ones, we pass in the value here. Value. And now I want to say print. Let's do count. And then we'll pass in the value here. Okay. Oops, forgot the parentheses. Okay, save. Let's restart. And now let's go to the follower count. So now when I increment this, you'll see we have 1 here. But you see I pressed it fast, right? So it skipped over 4 because I pressed it too fast. So there's a default range in here, but let's set our own range. So let's go here, and there's a third actual parameter that you can pass in here. There's duration time. And this is pretty easy. It's time. And you just pass in a duration. And you can set days, hours, microseconds, milliseconds. We're going to focus on seconds here. So let's do seconds, and let's do 3 seconds first. See how that is. Let's put this on a different line. Okay. So let's reload. And now for follower counts, now after I press this, nothing will happen for 3 seconds. And then we have count 1. So let's see what happens when I press this really fast. So it waits 3 seconds until the last time is pushed, and then it logs that value. So again, so I can do this for many, many seconds. It doesn't matter. And then once I stop, it'll wait 3 seconds. So you might be asking, what happens if I keep doing this and then I stop and then I go again before 3 seconds? So let's do that. Stop, go. So you can see it has to wait that entire 3 seconds for it to actually invoke the callback. Okay, so that's very good for API calls. Make sure that the user can play around with the button all they want to, but they have to choose something and they have to wait 3 seconds for it to actually submit. Okay? 1 second is probably a good time though. Okay, so let's do the interval now. So let's do interval, and I'm gonna pass in the follower count. Same concept here. Actually, let's just copy and paste this here. And we can just change this to interval. It's the same format. Okay, so now I'm gonna comment this out. So let's see what happens with interval. Let's reload. Oops, I want to do the count. So now let's look at our log now. So let's do this. So now we can keep pressing this, but it'll only submit every 1 second. But if we stop, it won't submit it after the last time. So these workers are very smart. They know if the user is actually pressing or changing the actual value of the state. So every 1 second, let's do 5 seconds. Reload. I don't think it actually updated the value. Let's restart. Now it'll wait a long time before you can actually print the value. Okay, so I hope you kind of understand how these work. Both debounce and interval are really powerful stuff. But remember that these only work on Rx interfaces. They don't work on strings or ints or lists, etc. So I hope I've been able to show you how powerful GetX is. If you come from a provider, you should definitely give GetX a try, and you probably will switch over to GetX, most likely. So I almost forgot to show you how to dispose of these workers here. That's very important, actually. So let's say you don't want to listen for the follower list anymore. So you need a way to tell the app to stop listening for this with this worker. So doing that is actually pretty easy. So let's go down here, and I'm going to actually change how we are structuring this ever worker. So instead of an arrow function, I'm going to use a regular function. So let's do this. And now let's say that we have our follower count, right? We have on the change or on the home screen, we have our follower count here, right? That we're changing with this. But now let's say that we want the follower count to be based on our follower list, which makes sense, right? So let's actually set our follower count. So we'll do follower count, and then we actually want to pass in this here. So value, we don't know what it is, but we can pass in value. So we can assume that this value is a list here. So let's actually do that. Let's do list value, and then we could say, or let's just call it list, list, and then we could say list dot length. Okay, missing a parentheses. Okay, so now when we add or remove from the list, this follower count will get updated correctly. So let's actually run this and see what happens. So let's go back to our add follower screen. Let's do Tom. Let's go back to the home screen. You can see followers 1. And we can go back to this screen and we can see 1 here too. So let's add a few more. Let's do Mickey, Larry, Joe. Now we can go back to the home screen and we see 4 followers, Mickey, Larry, Joe. Now, normally you wouldn't do it like this because you would be calling an API, but this kind of gives you an idea of how you would actually update one state based on a different state. So now let's say we don't want this to listen anymore after we reach 10 followers, or let's say 5 followers. In this case, it's actually pretty easy. We can add a condition here. We could say if list dot length is greater or equal to 5, then we want to call a certain function on this. So since we don't have a variable to actually dispose of this, we want to set this equal to a variable. So I'm going to create a new variable up here. I'm going to say final. Actually, it's not final. So let's do worker. We'll call it ever worker. Then I'm going to set that equal to this, because this is of type worker. Okay. And then here, if the length is greater than 5, I want to call ever worker. And we have a few different functions on here that we can call, but the main one is dispose. So dispose, and that's it. So once this count reaches 5, we will dispose of this ever worker, which means that it no longer exists in memory, and thus this follower count will never be updated past 5 when we update our follower list. Okay? So let's save and restart. And let's add some followers. I'm just going to put some letters to save time. T, G, Y, O. Let's look at this right now. So we have 4 here, right? So we have 4. Let's add another one. So we have 5. Let's add a 6th one. Let's do N. Let's go back. And now you can see we still have 5. which is what we expect. So we have 6 followers, but only 5 followers in the count here. So after we reached 5 here, we dispose of this worker. So the follower count no longer gets updated. So that's pretty cool. This allows you to have more control over when these workers exist. So yeah, I just wanted to add that part in for the workers. That's very important to dispose of your workers if you don't need them, especially this one here. So this one takes up a lot of memory if you are not careful about what you are doing. So yeah, I hope this helps. GetX is really, really cool stuff, and I want to do more with it in the future. I'm going to be doing more videos about the other aspects of the library. So yeah, stay tuned for more, and happy coding. Bye.